Hey everybody, I'm Nerdwell, and today we're going to talk about how to drop P1s like a pro. A little bit about me real quick. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. I'm a Bug Crowd ambassador. I've been doing bug bounties for about 2 years. Been working in IT and InfoSec for a little over 20 years, and currently work in critical infrastructure protection. So the purpose of today's talk is to help people who have some basic fundamental knowledge in bug bounties. Maybe you've read Web Application Hacker's Handbook. You know how to work with Burp Suite and move around, use some of the basic tools, manipulate an HTTP request, and see what you get back. The goal is to move you from finding P4s and P5s with the occasional P3 to finding P1s and P2s with the occasional P3. It's not easy to do, but that's what we're going to shoot for. So we'll start with the VRT. Now, I guess a word of warning, all of my hacking, bug bounty hacking, has been done through the Bug Crowd platform. So some of the lingo will be specific to Bug Crowd, but the principles are pretty generic and can be applied to any of the platforms. Now, one of my favorite things about Bug Crowd, though, is the VRT. And it really helps us as the hacker to focus our efforts based on impact, and helps us to know what to expect. And then it also helps put us on the same level in terms of communicating with the customer, the project, the program owner, so that we don't have to try to convince them of impact. It's right there. So that's pretty handy. Now looking at this list, these are our P1s. There's a few here that we're going to cross out and not talk about today. So really, I kind of break the P1 list into two different types. There's a few low-hanging fruits that are super impactful, but they're not really technical in nature. They don't require a lot of technical chops. There's even some tools to automate the process. And the problem with that is you're going to end up with a lot of duplicates that way. So the first one is default credentials. That's where someone is, they've left admin set. Disclosure of secrets. This is where maybe a developer has accidentally published an API key to a GitHub repo or something like that. And hard-coded passwords, similar. Super big no-nos, but also somewhat common, but very impactful. However, there's a decent chance of them being dupes, and these are all great, but our focus is on how we can develop a structured approach to repeatedly and consistently finding P1s across a multitude of different programs, and to find them with them not being dupes. So we're going to here we go. We're going to cross out these three. We're also not going to be talking about automotive stuff today. So that leaves us with this list. And one thing that should kind of jump out is all of these are server-side, but significantly, they also require no user interaction whatsoever. So as the hacker, I can identify this vulnerability, exploit this vulnerability, and pwn that server with zero interaction from anybody else. And that is really a shift in thinking that you have to make if in the way you approach a target from some of the more common bugs like XSS and CSRF and that kind of thing. Now, just for comparison, let's take a look at our P2 list. Here you can see we have lots of server side, but several of these also require some level of user interaction. For example, subdomain takeover can be set up without any user interaction, but in most instances, to actually exploit it, we need a user to visit that site. Similar with the OAuth. There are some ways we can exploit that without user interaction, but for the most part, they require some level of user interaction. And then looking at our P3 list, even fewer that don't require any user interaction. There's an SSRF on here that is a low impact, and does not require any user interaction. But for the most part, all of these do require some level. So really what we're doing is we're moving from, in the P1s, server side with 0 user interaction, down to P2s to P3s with more and more user interaction along the way, and our attacks are moving more and more to the client side. And the impact is decreasing accordingly. So that is informative to us, and it should help us work on or identify our way of thinking, the way that we approach our target. And so the first step in dropping P1s like a pro is to shift your focus. Basically, we see what we want to see. So when we approach a target, we're going to find what we're looking for. And that sounds so simple. But think of it like this. It's any moderately complex web application, when you run it through Burp and then go look at the target and just browse around, it can be pretty overwhelming. And in fact, sometimes I have a hard time like picking a particular endpoint or even knowing where to start. And so what happens is you can fall into a trap where you just kind of browse around and see what hits you. And the problem with that is if you do find a vulnerability that way, things that you just accidentally encounter are very likely to have been accidentally encountered by someone else before. And that means it's probably a dupe. And so also not very impactful, most likely. So we want to take more of a sniper approach and look for specific bugs. So if we look for P2s, 3s, and 4s, we're going to find P2s, 3s, and 4s. So we're going to emphasize P1s, and we're going to do that to the exclusion of everything else. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are like, hold up, dude, what are you talking about? Bear with me. I'm not saying we're not going to report P2s and P3s, but in this approach, what we're going to do is we are going to learn the architecture of the system. We're going to build an understanding, a mental model of the system. And in the process of finding P1s, P2s and P3s are just going to kind of fall out. And we report those. Hopefully they're not dupes. Some of them will be, some of them won't be. But you know, that's how it goes. So one thing I've noticed when I'm looking for P1s, and I'm emphasizing those to the exclusion of everything else. That means if I'm going through it, I'm working on trying to find a command injection bug, and I see a potential P2 or a potential 3, like a SSRF or something. I don't want to just let that go away and forget about it, but also don't want to go running down that tangent and completely lose my train of thought, because it's important to get into a flow. One of the most important things that human hackers bring to the equation is the creativity of our individual viewpoints. And that, in a lot of cases, comes down to getting into a flow. And so when you run down all the potential little bugs, you miss out on the big ones. So one thing I do, I use a Mac, and I will just take a real quick screenshot. And you can get a third-party app for Windows to do this, but in the Mac, I think it's like a Command-Shift-3, for example. And it just grabs a screenshot, puts it in a folder, and then later on, I can go through that folder and just kind of see what I wanted to remember and then go take a look at it when I'm not in the flow of looking for P1s. All right, now, the next step in dropping P1s like a pro is to believe. And this is going to sound a little cliche, but it actually makes a lot of sense. First, you got to believe in yourself. You wouldn't imagine how many people don't believe that they can do the hard stuff. And you know, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right. And so all too often I see people just not even try, or not even, they may try, but they're not really trying. And so what you need to do is believe in yourself. You can do it. The only thing holding you back is your belief that you can do it. Literally. Then you also got to believe that these vulnerabilities exist. I find myself falling into this trap sometimes where I'm like, man, this is a world-class internet company. There's no way that they're going to have forgotten to escape this input. You don't know if you don't try, and you'd be surprised. With the larger the source code base, the more likely they are to miss this stuff. And so you got to believe that they're there. And at the end of the day, there are vulnerabilities there. It may be a question of how deep you need to go, or maybe you need to leverage some initial attack vector to be able to hit an API in a manner that they were not expecting. But it's a small little nuances that give you a unique access point that turn into very impactful bugs. And so the best thing to do, in my opinion, in my experience, is to just don't even question it. The bugs are there. Every single application has numerous P1s waiting to be found. So don't get discouraged and believe they are there. Know they are there. I like this, this saying from that one movie. There's some movie, what is it? Field of Dreams or something. If you build it, they will come. You got to take a leap of faith. And that really does apply to bug bounties. It seems silly, but it's so true. Okay, now we're going to get into some more concrete stuff here. So the third step to dropping P1s like a pro is to apply a scientific approach. Use the scientific method. And it's super duper valuable. And it's amazing how applicable it really is. So starting at the top, we ask a question. In our case, most of the time, the question is going to be, how does this system work? Or where can I find a P1? You pick the question. And then you do some background research. And that's where we are, let's say we are approaching a new target. And we pipe it through Burp. We exercise all of the functionality. And then go back into Burp and just look around and understand what the server stack is, what the client-side stack is. It's even a good idea in a lot of instances to actually run Wireshark at the same time, because in a lot of cases, it's using protocols in addition to HTTP that you're not going to catch through Burp. And in some cases, you might find some severe bugs. I have found some pretty cool P1s just by looking at Wireshark traffic. So key here, though, is we're doing background research, and we are building a mental model of how this system is built on the server side, on the client side, and then from there, we're going to build a hypothesis, multiple, but we're going to start with a hypothesis of, here's how I think this system is built and designed and implemented. And then we're going to test those hypotheses. And so, just as you would in any scientific experiment, you develop tests. So let's say you believe that it's running Microsoft SQL Server. Well, you might implement some methods to fingerprint specifically Microsoft SQL versus Postgres or MySQL. And there's all sorts of tools and talks and stuff on that, but we're going to kind of focus more on a high level here. So build up your experiment, or build up your test, and then confirm or deny your hypothesis. And then move through your model of the system in a structured, methodical manner, adjusting it as needed based on your results. And then once you have formed a strong understanding of how the system is built, then you can apply the same principles to finding actual bugs. Okay, let's take an example of how I might document a system, build a model, and then test that model. So let's say I'm approaching a new target, and I can quickly determine there's an Nginx on the front end, reverse proxy. And by manipulating query parameters, I'm able to generate an error at the home endpoint, and I'm able to find its Apache HTTPD. Then at the API endpoint, I follow a similar approach. Unexpected input throws an error, and I can see that it's open resty. Similar with support. A lot of times a support portal will run to some third-party app, and this is my picture of the internet. Okay, so let's say on the Apache side, I'm able to throw some errors or otherwise fingerprint the database. I'm going to try to find out what I can. If it's Microsoft SQL, I will target my attack to MS SQL specific SQL injection. One of my favorite things to do is to look at return from the HTTP responses for APIs. And a lot of times you'll actually see in there that it will show you the server name, API server name. And you'll see like a 14-character random digits or random hex characters or alphanumeric, I can't remember. But it's a specific length that's very noticeable, and it's the format that Docker uses for randomly generating server names. And so something very subtle like that can give you some insight. And then based on that, odds are very good that there's somewhere a Docker registry server. And what we can then do is formulate a hypothesis and a very pinpoint test experiment for how we might access or exploit an SSRF bug to reach in and hit that Docker registry server and pull the Docker images. And I mean, that's a super impactful bug. It's the kind of bug that very few people are going to take the time and energy to understand the system well enough to be able to identify and exploit that bug. But it's actually not all that technically complex. And those are exactly the kinds of P1s that we're trying to find. High ROI. Okay, so let's take a look here at some of the next steps we need to do. So the fourth step you need to take to drop P1s like a pro is to ruthlessly challenge assumptions. At the end of the day, assumptions are the root of all vulns. You know, if pride is the root of all evil, assumptions are the root of all vulnerabilities at the end of the day. But they also can impact the way that we approach a target. Many times I will catch myself saying, oh, certainly they wouldn't do that, and I won't even bother testing it. And I try to be mindful of that. When I catch myself thinking that, I'm like, no, test that. If you think they wouldn't do that, then odds are other hackers think the same thing and might just bypass that test. And that's exactly the kind of exclusivity that you want to get, that you have some influence over, that will help you generate P1s that are not dupes. And then as you build an understanding of developer mindsets and patterns and practices, you'll find that in a lot of instances, they will say the exact same thing to themselves as they're developing software. So I actually have been a software developer before, and this happens all the time. You write an application with the expectation that the user is going to be interacting with it in a particular way. And then if they don't, well, then your answer to them is like, well, don't do that. It's like when you go to the doctor and you're like, hey, my arm hurts when I touch it here, and he's like, well, stop doing that. It's, of course, that doesn't work in the hacker world. That's exactly where we're going to hit it. And so we want to think, what are the assumptions that the developers are making? What are the things that they think or are taking for granted about the user experience and the user interaction? And how can we violate those assumptions in unexpected ways? So the last step to dropping P1s like a pro is building your skills, developing yourself into a master hacker. And so if you think about it, if everybody could be finding P1s all the time, they would. And there's a reason that they're not. And at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that it takes some technical chops. It's hard. It's not rocket science, but it's hard. And it takes work, dedication, practice. You spend a lot of time behind the monitor learning something, pounding on the keyboard without getting the result that you want. And you have to learn from that, not get frustrated. And you want to approach that in a way that builds your skills in a methodical manner, so that every moment that you are spending behind that keyboard and every program that you're hacking on is working towards some greater picture. And the way you do that is to start with a skills matrix. And your skills matrix is going to be different than mine because I have different interests, I have different background, I have a different exposure to different things than you might have. And you know, I want my career to maybe to go to a different place than you do. And so that's going to be reflected in your skills matrix. But one thing that is pretty universal is on each of those skills, each of us are going to be at different levels. And it's important to quantify that for yourself. But you need to do it in a way that's not super time consuming and easy to track. And one very effective way of doing that is to basically just break it down into 3 levels. On pretty much any skill, you can either have an awareness level, have a proficiency, or a mastery of that skill. And at the awareness level, it's kind of like you know enough to know that you don't know. But you know enough to know where to go look, and that's super valuable. It's kind of like having a database or an index of technologies and ideas and platforms and such that when you see it, you know where to go look to get some more information. Maybe you saw a talk on it and you go watch that talk, and you every time you do that, every time you put that knowledge into practice, you are moving up that chain for that skill. And as you do that more and more and more, what you do is not only level your game and move from awareness to proficiency to mastery, but you're also developing your own niche. And that is right there a key to finding P1s on a regular basis. It's not something you're going to see or hear or easily explain, but it's something that kind of just happens. So let me go into it a little bit. Okay, so let's say you have developed a unique mastery of, let's say, binary reverse engineering. Well, that's a skill. Plenty of people can do that, but not a lot of people put the time in. It takes a lot of time, a lot of frustrating hours poking, hex values into memory addresses and failing to learn how that works. And so if you put that time in and you develop mastery with that, that's a very unique skill. It's a niche that can be super valuable to program owners. And so one of the really cool things that BugCrowd has done recently is really elevate the amount of information that they take from the hackers. So you can go in there and fill out your profile and put in your skills, your strengths, in your level of interest. You can put your resume and all that kind of stuff. And then that is used by program owners to identify hackers for private programs. And so there's a few ways that you can increase your odds of finding P1s. So first is straight up technical know-how. And of course, that's great. But even then, the smartest guy in the world can't find a P1 if a non-duplicate P1 if somebody else beats him to it. Now, let's say you are somebody who has a niche and you've filled out your profile and you've been matched with the program and there's a smaller pool. Well, naturally, that's going to increase the likelihood that you are going to find non-duplicate, high-impact bugs. But another thing you can do is build a relationship with that program owner. So you got to look at it in terms of a career. Look at it in terms of a relationship. One of the interesting things that Casey Ellis has said a lot is that every bug is a startup and every hacker is an entrepreneur. And I think so you got to think, he created this entire environment, right? So what he says should carry a whole lot of weight, and we should really think on that. And it could be some very valuable insight there. When you approach it from a relationship perspective and develop your skills to match with unique needs of different program owners, then their business is going to continue rolling out new code, new products, and they're going to need to continue to have testing done. And if you are someone that they can consistently rely on to generate high-quality reports, high-impact bugs, they're going to call you back to all their programs. And you might even get some unique opportunities that others are not getting. And so that is one way, one powerful way of gaining exclusivity into a program that inherently gives you access to higher impact bugs that are not dupes. Now, one of the downsides to that is you do have less influence over a lot of those factors. You don't decide when a program starts or stops, or when their products are going to be released, or what kind of testing they need, and so on and so forth. So one thing that you can do to gain a form of exclusivity that other hackers either don't know how or aren't willing to put in the effort to get to is back to skills development. So a lot of times when I'm working on a program, I will encounter a bug that I think is there, but it looks like it might take some effort, and I'm feeling too lazy to do it. And I try to catch myself doing that, because if I'm feeling too lazy to do it and it seems like a lot of work to me, it probably has done that to other people. And it's maybe something that other people have just passed on. And in a lot of cases, I have come across bugs that I know many other people could find and would find, but it took more time, more effort and energy than I wanted to put into it. And at the end of the day, yielded an outcome that was good for everybody. High impact, non-duplicate, and in that particular instance, lower return on investment than maybe some others, because I had to put in that extra energy. However, every time you do that, you're building your skills. And so if I come across something, crypto's a good example. There are many times I just took on an opportunity that I knew was going to be super challenging. I knew I didn't have the background, solely for the purpose of learning. And once you've learned that, it's yours. Nobody can take that away, and you can apply it to future programs. It's super valuable. And that right there is a form of exclusivity that you have almost all the influence over. And so you can actually not only learn about technologies deeper than others, but also find entire classes of bugs. One of my favorite examples of this is Albino Wax's research into HTTP request smuggling. So, if you haven't watched that Black Hat talk, you absolutely need to go watch it immediately. But what he goes into is how it was a widely known theoretical attack for a long time, but there was no structured way to exploit it without wreaking havoc on the customer's system. And so he took, I don't know how much time, but I'm sure it took quite a bit of time, and to take a methodical approach, a scientific approach to understanding what is happening there. And at the end of the day, he came up with a a very repeatable process. In fact, such a repeatable process that he was able to put it into a Burp plugin that now any of us can point and shoot at any target, and with pretty high rate of accuracy determine if it is vulnerable to request smuggling. And so that is a super cool example where somebody took a hard problem that took a lot of initial effort that other people were not willing to do. And he initially found all sorts of bugs. I don't remember how much money he got off of it, but it was $30,000, $40,000 or something like that. It was pretty interesting. And then once that initial threshold of effort has been put in, it's put in, and you just cash in on it over time. And that's where this matrix comes in really handy. Build it up and move things up, and next thing you know, you look back and you can't believe how far you've come in such a short period of time. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about real quick here is the soft skills side of this. And I talked a little bit about it there a minute ago. But on the one hand, at the initial parts here, we're talking about the micro stuff, the real technical stuff. And then we've got our approach and how we approach the target, how we approach ourselves and our work ethic, and then our personal and career development. But there's this other element that can have a very important role, and that is that building relationship with program managers. And of course, they're going to notice people who frequently produce high impact bugs, and they're going to call those people back to their program. But another way you can do it, very effective way, is to approach it as a business. Approach it to build that relationship. And so, first of all, anytime you write a report, you got to look at that as not only an opportunity to find a reportable bug that's a non-dupe and get a bounty, but it is also an opportunity to totally screw up and burn that relationship or hurt the trust between you and the platform or reduce your accuracy rating. And so personally, every time I go to write a report, I kind of pause for a second and think to myself, okay, is this going to be reproducible? First of all, if I can't ensure that it is reproducible, don't report it. If I'm sure it's reproducible, is it a security issue? And, sometimes that depends on the business, but if you have a pretty good feeling it is, then it's worth it. And then, do you think it's going to be non-dupe? Because every moment that you spend on a report is a moment that you're not spending hacking, but at the same time, the better you write your report, the better relationship that you're going to build with program owners. And if you want some examples, go look at HackerOne's Hacktivity and read some of those reports. Some of them are pretty bad, and people have like an approach, an attitude of like, hey, you owe me. And that's definitely the wrong attitude. You want to have the attitude of, hey, we're collaborating. I want to help you. You're going to help me. But there's no expectation. And that's kind of a difficult mindset to get into. But to help draw a parallel. So I've been doing IT stuff for like over 20 years. And I started out working in a computer store and doing on-site services, networking and that kind of stuff for small and medium-sized businesses. And many, many times I had a customer who, several different types of customers. So there's customers who would be very good repeat customers and then occasionally would kind of screw you. And you got to make a decision at that point. Are you going to be a stickler on that, or are you going to take it in stride for the sake of the relationship? And you can rest assured the customer is watching to see how you react. And then there's other types of customers. There's some customers who are basically just going to try to abuse your willingness to help, and and not be worth the effort. And the way that can translate into a bounty program are program managers who consistently downgrade substantially. At the end of the day, you have no control over that. But what you do have control over is how you respond. And there are lots of other people watching. And so when you respond to that, respond in a positive way. Try to make your case, but if it doesn't succeed, let it be. And then and move on. And even if it doesn't work out with that particular program, there are a lot of other people. Take BugCrowd, for example. There's a researcher success. There's the other side of it, the people who are integrating with the program owners. And I'm sure there's some other people in between. I have no inside knowledge, but this is what I've gleaned from experience. And so those people certainly, and triagers, don't forget the triagers, of course. When they interact with you repeatedly, they get a good feel of your trustworthiness, your willingness to compromise, and just your overall demeanor. And just like anybody else, they're going to want to work with somebody who's pleasant and understanding and trustworthy. And so more important than any particular bug is the relationship with the platform, the relationship with the program owner. And you can achieve that on a technical level. You have to achieve that on a technical level, but you also have to respect it and develop it and nurture it on the non-technical level. And so what I would leave you with on that is, if you have found a bug and you have decided to submit it and write a report, then make it the best possible report you can write. And if it's not worth the time that it would take to make an awesome report, then it's probably not worth reporting. And you got to make that trade-off. And that is where you drop P1's like a pro, when you start maximizing your time, maximizing your return on investment, and focusing your energy on P1's server-side, no client interaction. And then those other ones will just kind of follow along as you develop an understanding of the application. All right, well, I hope that was helpful. There's my Twitter handle if you want to hit me up with any questions. Otherwise, have a good day.